owes that success to a large number of people. And there's a lot of people in this room that are responsible for the success that Acacia has experienced in the last 12 years, I guess, here at K-State. As Chris just pointed out, the Carlson Award recognizes an individual whose personal style and attributes blend well with the principles of Acacia. You know, and we hear a lot about leadership. We hear a lot about it in this fraternity. We hear a lot about it in society. And it's pretty difficult to define. When we start talking about it, we find it difficult to really precisely identify what leadership really means. But you can't go very far in that conversation before you start hearing words like integrity, and accountability, responsibility, dependability, and some of those attributes that we think are personal attributes as opposed to job skills. So today we're honored to recognize someone who really represents all of those attributes, and I think today I'd like to point out to the undergraduates that there's a real thread of importance here for all of you. You know, whether you graduate with a degree in engineering or architecture, law, medicine, whatever it is, you can be really successful in that field from a technical standpoint. But your real success in life is going to depend on how well you can integrate some of those attributes I just mentioned into your lifestyle and who you are and how you conduct yourself in the world. And some of you remember the words, I'm sure, about preparing ourselves as educated men and have a greater influence and impact in the communities in which we may reside. Well, that's kind of what we're talking about. It's clearly what we're talking about. Remember, we're not going to recognize Tom for what he did. We're going to recognize Tom for who he was and how he did it. And I'm going to tag team this with Curtis. I'm going to do the first couple hours. Curtis is going to wrap it up. I'm supposed to give you the context of our relationship with Schultz Construction and Tom. And that context is important because it kind of demonstrates where we were when this fraternity was looking at remodeling the current house, and some stories that we don't have to go into in detail today, but sort of represent what our challenges were at that point in time. Let me go a little bit of personal background here that gets me into that context. My work, as some of you know, was with the Kansas 4-H Foundation. And going back about 25 years, we just finished a multi-million-dollar campaign. We were going to build a building in Rock Springs, and Schultz Construction was a little bidder. That was our first contact. From that point on, we had 7 or 8 construction projects with Schultz Construction. And we continually worked with that firm because it was critically important to us that we work with a firm that had integrity and dependability. I'll tell you why. As some of you also know, every project at Rock Springs is paid for from donated dollars. You may not know that our board wouldn't let us borrow any money, even for construction periods. No loans. We had to have the money identified before we could start a project, and we didn't go back to donors asking for additional money once we started. So for us, the contractor's integrity was absolutely paramount and critical to what we did. So when the Acacia Fraternity House was due to be remodeled, and at the time, we had no men in the house, as most of you know from your history of the house, I'm sure. And at that point, I think due primarily to the negotiation skills of Gary Haig, we had rented the house to the Fidels. And I didn't ever see the real fine print of that, but I think what was in that contract was that they were paying us for the right to complete the demolishing of the house before construction. And they were pretty good at it. At that point, our committee was looking at the need to select a contractor. As I've already told you, I was pretty biased at that point, but we had people like Ron Graver and Charlie Bush, Curtis, and other people who were in that process. And I remember Charlie Bush saying, you know, there's no organization in Manhattan that has more integrity and operates with a higher standard of performance than Schultz Construction. Throughout all of that, I haven't said his name, Tom Farr was the thread that gave us the contact to control those projects, because every one of the projects that we had at Rock Springs, and then our Acacia project, they hit the number, the budget, and they hit the completion date. And some of you know that doesn't happen in construction on a regular basis. That's really tough. And when we looked at the project at Manhattan, at the Acacia House in Manhattan, it was pretty well gutted. Some of you haven't seen pictures of that. And as a lot of you know, when you go through a remodeling project, it's really difficult to anticipate what you're going to encounter. We ran into things like the ceiling in the food service, in the dining room area, had a roof that had dropped 10 inches. We had to clear all that out, jack the ceiling up without destroying the integrity of the roof structure, put a steel beam in. Remember this, Tom?
Oh, yes.
Put a steel
Worked up to the engineer.
That's right. Put the steel beam in, and that wasn't anticipated. So we encountered all the kinds of things you get through that process. And remember now, we started when the Dells walked out at the end of May, and when a few guys in the room here, Lucas and others, Joseph, came in that fall, we had to be ready for them. Now, there were a few things they would like to have had completely finished off, but it was ready to go. That's a 10-week period with a major construction project. So why a lot of us who are so proud of what you've done in this chapter and recognize how many people have been responsible for this success, also appreciate the fact that today we can go back into the history a little bit and point out that when you have people you work with like Tom, and the way Schultz Construction did that, added to our credibility, it added to our respect, and it gave us confidence with our donors. There are a lot of guys out there that contribute money to this project that weren't sure it was going to happen. And a lot of them didn't think we could do that in 10 weeks. So the credibility that comes because of the kind of people you work with. And those attributes that I mentioned: integrity, dependability, responsibility, accountability. That's what makes the world really turn. And we're honoring a guy today that, in my opinion, was as responsible as anyone for us performing successfully as a chapter here at Kansas State. So I really appreciate being a part of this. And Curtis, I'm going to hand it to you, because Curtis is going to take it from that construction period on through.